the title of my paper is restating or the status of the Palestinian question, because I believe it is more than the Palestinian question, the Palestinian project, because a question can be of different groups, or it has ethical, regional, and international dimensions, and demographic as well. And so what I want to discuss, there is a lot of the discussion, the political discourse that is prevalent. They talk about liquidation of the Palestinian question. If it is not a simplistic way, I think it's not accurate. How do you liquidate a question if the people exist? And if the people hold fast to their historical narrative, there is no liquidation of the question. You can liquidate a national movement or a political regime, but the question, since there are people who exist and they continue to hold on to their historical narrative and their rights, then we cannot speak of a liquidation of a Palestinian question. I'm saying this very quickly because I hear it repeated that there is fear of the liquidation of or potential liquidation of the Palestinian question, and I think this is there's no basis for such a fear. The essence of the question that I want to talk about is that the Palestinian political movement is facing an impasse, but at the same time I believe that Israel and the Zionist movement is also facing an impasse. And of course I will talk about the different impasses and how they are different from each other and what are the implications of that on the Palestinian national project. I will address the Palestinian political movement. I think the main problem is in the diagnosis and the existing discourse that the Palestinian question is reduced by the occupation or the framework of the occupation and the occupation of the occupied territories, meaning the 1967 occupied territories, and therefore there's some sort of normalization of the Israeli existence, and it is something that even the political elites and even non-political elites, they're talking about the homeland and the two wings of the Palestinian country and the northern governorate and the southern governorate. They reduced the idea of historic Palestine into West Bank and Gaza Strip to 22% of of the total area of Palestine, whereas the proper diagnosis and that the Palestinian people confronted and continue to confront a colonial settler movement that is racist, and without reinstating this discourse, and I think our discourse will continue to be lacking, especially in terms of attracting or mobilizing support for the Palestinian question. This is my opinion, an important point, and it has its significance and implications when we talk about the Palestinian National Project. What do we mean by that? Because the Palestinian National Project was reduced to removing the occupation or ending the occupation of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and sometimes they talk about the return of refugees, and sometimes they even drop that, and this is not that topic, but ending the occupation and everything else remains as is and before. Despite that, and despite what happened post-Oslo until this date, there is still a state of denial by the political elites and the non-police elites. and they denied that Oslo had failed and that the two-state solution had failed practically. And until yesterday or even today, they say they went and came back, and they are going to return the Palestinian tax money, and while they deducted the amounts that were used to be allocated to the prisoners and the families of martyrs. So they're going to transfer that money. And so this takes me to the third issue of the Palestinian impasse, which is representation. Not only that the Palestinian discourse is lacking and as how to talk about the Palestinian question and the Palestinian national rights, but there is also a state of denial in terms of facing the reality on the ground, as the fact that there's colonial settlement, a racist situation that encompasses the whole historic Palestine and not only the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And this is justification to hold on to the Oslo discourse or the two-state solution, or the establishment of a Palestinian entity. The other issue linked to this is the representation. There's a problem in terms of the Palestinian representation. And it is impossible to talk about a Palestinian national project without a solution for what are the institutions or to solve the issue of representation. The PLO now does not exist except on paper. It is a cosmetic existence. And the Palestinian Central Council and National Council are there just to cover for certain decisions, or in the best case scenario has an advisory function, and it is not an active institution that where its decisions are binding. I think one of the main problems currently is that the Palestinian decisions are taken by individuals, and they are all taken outside the framework of institutions. And the evidence to that, what I said earlier, and that is, for example, refusing to take the tax returns to if there are deductions of the amounts for the martyrs and prisoners. But the same person who took that decision is now taking a counter decision to accept it, even when they deduct the amounts of for prisoners and families of martyrs. And also the suspension of the Oslo Agreement, suspension of agreements, all the decisions in that regard, or to revoke the security coordination, are taken by individuals, and then they are reversed by the same individuals, and outside the framework of institutions. It is the decision making power is in the hands of very few. And so how do we revive, whether we call it the PLO or a new Palestinian national movement on the basis of representation of all the Palestinians, and not as happened after Oslo, whereby we deconstructed the Palestinian society into different fields or different communities, the 48 alone, Gaza alone, West Bank alone, Jerusalem alone, and Syria and Lebanon, and so we become more like different people living next to each other, and each community of Palestinians has its own local leaderships and their own local considerations, political considerations. And this is something that we can talk about in more depth. I'm just giving now addresses. Sorry, I mean like just the headlines about these issues. The institution and the way they handle international institutions and agencies and the regional institutions, the way they deal with the Palestinian question. Some of the legal thinkers who talked about the exceptional state or the state of exception, who is Giorgio Ardan. This means that the Palestinian context or question is put in a state of exceptionalism, meaning outside the norms and the customs and international law and the humanitarian law. And if we look back from the onset of the Palestinian national movement and the beginning of the Palestinian question, there hasn't been we didn't see implementation of any UN resolution from following the Balfour Declaration until this date. There were tens or hundreds maybe of resolutions by the UN, but none of them was implemented in terms of the Palestinian question. And this is one indicator, the state of exceptionalism, that you don't, that you are not subjected to the international law, regulations and provisions and norms. So this has its significance, it has its implications, and to put the Palestinian question in a state of constant, permanent emergency means that this betting is still at stake in terms of internationalization, as if the solution is to internationalize the Palestinian question, the internationalization of the solution, and the main effort is focused on diplomatic channels or to work within international institutions as if this is the solution, whereas this effort until this day did not yield any results and will not yield any results, because as I mentioned, since the Palestinian question is kept in or positioned in a state under a state of exceptionalism, then there won't be any sanctions or imposed serious sanctions imposed on Israel. And until this date, there was no one single sanction imposed on Israel, despite the fact that they committed massacres and occupation and collective punishment and or other acts, but still the international order or the international system continues to protect Israel. The last point that I would like to address I want to talk a little bit and elaborate on the last point, because I think it requires a bit of discussion, because our analysis of the Palestinian question being a product of a colonial, racist colonial settlement project, this asks the question, what did this system of colonial settlement entail? We have the state of Israel, a powerful state that has support from international community, from major powers around the world. But if we compare Israel with a colonial settler states that were established, such as Canada, the US, Australia, New Zealand, there seems something is not happening for the Zionist movement, because half of the Palestinian people continue to exist on their land, whereas the original American Native Americans have almost disappeared, and the same in Australia. But as people, they were liquidated, they were eliminated. But the number of Palestinians now in historic Palestine is more than the number of Jews. In 2018, according to the statistics department, the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics, we were equal in numbers from last year. The half of the Palestinian people, the 6 million people, are still exist on their land, and this is a major failure for a settler colonial movement whose main function or tried its utmost efforts to eliminate these people, expel them, and forcibly displace them away from their homeland. The other question is that the Palestinian diaspora, and they continue to hold on to their national belonging. The Palestinian nationalism, whether inside Palestine or abroad, is still vibrant and alive, and this is another indicator of the failure of the Zionist colonial settlement project. And therefore it's not that only the people are still existing on their land, but those even that were exiled and displaced and made refugees, they continue to hold on to their national identity and their nationalist feelings. And I believe anyone who looks for hope or a source for optimism, I think this is very important, and we often forget that they failed. It's true that we failed in our projects, but they also, their failure, their strategic historic failure as a Zionist movement, they failed in their mission if we compare it to other colonial settlement states. And this explains, for example, why the countries that were established on the premise of colonial settlement projects such as Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the US, these are countries that had they have a historic sympathy, if you want, because they did that project, and they are the Zionist movement is trying to do that. But the difference is that Israel didn't succeed yet, and they will not, because even after 70 years or even after 100 years of this colonial settlement project, it is not accomplished, and it is becoming more difficult and by the day to achieve it. And even if you talk about transfer and other, where are they going to send us to Jordan? What does that mean? That means that Jordan will become South Lebanon sooner or later, and so Palestinians will start to will do what people in South Lebanon are doing, and so on and so forth. And this increases hostility among Arab people towards Israel, and so this is not an option. The third point. Another point on the international level, if you look more carefully, we see that there is growing among people, and I'm talking about civil society movements. I'm not talking about the leadership or the elites, or that the PA is focusing on, or the political movement is focusing on. There's a growing feelings among civil society organizations and those who have popular constituencies, whether churches, students, workers. We see transformations and shifts even among Jews themselves in the US and elsewhere. There is a shift, there is and we need to find a way in our national project and to harness that and to deepen the divisions within Israel, and definitely try to gain the growing feeling among non-Zionist Jews or those who are far from the Zionist movement, and how to benefit from that growing trend. There are also no indications, despite of what is happening in terms of the PA and the disturbances or the problems that we have in the 1948 territories between one political party or the other, and sometimes it works or doesn't. Some people agree or several disagree. Yet the Palestinian national feeling, nationalism is still alive and vibrant, and it is very important to remember that and to nurture it. And I will stop here since the time is up.